On our newscast tonight, inter-Korean tensions are high as both sides ready themselves militarily. With that as the backdrop, President Park Geun-hye speaks up, saying that now is the time to open up a peaceful era on the peninsula. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe paying his respects to war criminals at the Yasukuni Shrine was the last straw. The Korean government announces plans to gain support from the international community to call for changes to Japan's nationalist stance. And despite North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's conciliatory New Year's address, South Korean Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin anticipates Pyongyang will go on the offensive soon. He calls on South Korean forces to better prepare for provocations. We have these stories and more, so stay with us.
It is 3 a.m. in Mexico City, 1 p.m. in Sochi, and 6 on the first Thursday of 2014 here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gun-young.
And I'm Daniel Cha. Thank you for joining us. We begin with the answer to the question where there will be more reshuffling in the President Park Geun-hye's office.
Where President Park Geun-hye has no plans to reshuffle her cabinet, and this is according to Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun during an emergency news conference less than an hour ago at the presidential office of Cheongwade.
This is an important time when continuous economic development is the key issue, and the security environment must be bolstered. With that in mind, the cabinet has no time but to fully concentrate on state affairs. The president is not at all considering a reshuffle of her cabinet.
Now, his comments come in response to recent media reports of a possible shakeup of the cabinet at the start of the new year. Well, will the new year bring about a new era of inter-Korean relations? President Park Geun-hye says she will make sure that efforts are made in 2014 to realize peace on the Korean peninsula. Her remarks came in response to a New Year's phone call from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on this Thursday, one day after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, in his New Year's address, delivered an unexpected conciliatory message to South Korea. Well, President Park also said that no country should be allowed to hurt regional neighbors by breaching trust and urged the UN chief to help pave the road for global peace and cooperation. Well, those remarks are seen by many as a rebuke of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who last week visited the highly controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. The new year is the time to make amends and bury old hatchets, but it's going to take a lot to convince Korea to rebuild relations with Japan, especially following recent high-profile visits to a controversial war shrine and Tokyo's incessant claims to Korean territory. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
As we begin 2014, bilateral relations between Korea and Japan are on bad footing, largely due to a series of visits to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine in recent days. A member of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet visited the shrine, which honors Japan's war dead and several Class A war criminals, on New Year's Day, less than 1 week after Abe made his own visit. Yoshitaka Shindo, Japan's Internal Affairs and Communications Minister, said he visited the shrine to pay respect to those who lost their lives in war. The Yasukuni Shrine is viewed by Korea and China as a symbol of Japan's wartime aggression. Korean Foreign Ministry spokesperson Cho Tae-yong criticized Shindo's move, saying there seems to be a lack of historical awareness among high-profile Japanese political figures. Abe's New Year's address also hit a nerve with Seoul and Beijing when he called for, quote, building a new Japan, vowing to defend Japanese territory, including its territorial waters and airspace. Abe pledged to upgrade Japan's defense measures of the islands in the East China Sea, known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. Japan will also mark its annual Takeshima Day on February 22nd, which calls for Korea to return Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo to Japan. The islets are Korean territory and are under Korean jurisdiction. Abe also suggested the country's pacifist constitution, imposed on Japan after the Second World War, should be amended by the year 2020. And call for a more patriotic tone in the country's history textbooks, backing changes to how the Second World War is taught in schools. The Korean government is planning to call for changes to Japan's nationalistic stance by gaining support from the international community. South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se is due to visit Washington this month, right before a visit by Shotaro Yachi, a special advisor to Abe's cabinet. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un called for better relations with South Korea in his New Year's address on this Wednesday. But does he mean this, and what else can we make of Kim's speech? Our Han Da-eun looks at the possible implications.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un delivered a rather conciliatory message toward South Korea on Wednesday.
We must create an atmosphere to improve ties between the two Koreas. I will work together with anyone who values our people and seeks reunification to improve relations.
Seoul's defense ministry has said it expects more provocative acts from Pyongyang targeting South Korea sometime around March of this year, following the execution of Chang Song-taek, Kim Jong-un's uncle, who was once the North's second most powerful man. Despite the unexpectedly friendly tone of his speech, however, most experts echoed the government's view.
The conciliatory message is not worthy of special attention. North Korea has sent friendly messages in the past before carrying out provocations. I think the New Year's address implies Kim Jong-un's hopes for stability rather than for sincere reconciliation with South Korea.
The North Korean leader also mentioned the execution of Chang Song-taek, although not by name. Referring to his uncle as factionalist filth, he said that removing him has strengthened the ruling Workers' Party. Pundits say mentioning the execution in detail in the New Year's message is a rare move and reflects his still nascent leadership. But they say what really needs to be noted is that Kim put greater emphasis on Pyongyang's ideology education, which calls for blind loyalty to the regime than before.
This shows that Kim Jong-un's leadership has not reached a stable stage yet. The New Year's address in general contains no special messages nor dramatic changes in North Korea's policies.
The experts also note that almost half of Kim Jong-un's 12-page New Year's address conveyed his desire to improve the state's economy. The leader stressed the importance of agriculture and new construction to enhance the standard of living of the North Korean people. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
Moving on, South Korea's defense chief says the country needs to better prepare for provocations from Pyongyang, despite the conciliatory tone of Kim Jong-un's New Year's address. At a meeting with military brass on Thursday, Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin emphasized the importance of enhancing Seoul's defense capabilities. His remarks follow the North Korean leader's New Year's message on Wednesday, in which he called for better ties between the two Koreas. Defense Ministry spokesman Kim Min-seok shed more light on Pyongyang's possible motivations, pointing out that the North frequently takes a softer line towards the South when faced with hardships, but tends to take a more provocative approach that involves threatening Seoul and its allies when things don't work out as planned.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by 2. Now, Seoul's Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok has expressed concerns over the recent weakening of the Japanese yen. Hyun's remarks came on Thursday after the government's first meeting of the new year. He said the government will continue to support small and medium-sized businesses in 2014 so that they can better weather the impact of currency fluctuations. The finance chief added that the government remains reserved about raising tax rates, saying he would rather reduce existing tax breaks. He can also emphasize that next year's economic policies will focus on boosting domestic demand so that ordinary people can feel the benefits of the nation's economic growth. Now, as we open up the new year, there are a number of changes that will affect the financial sector as the nation aims to provide consumers a friendlier, safer environment to carry out their day-to-day financial activities. Our UDN has the roundup of the types of changes we can expect in 2014.
These are the fake 10 billion won checks that were cashed in the middle of last year. A jaw-dropping incident that proved that forgery on a large scale is still possible to this day. 10 billion won translates to roughly 10 million US dollars. To prevent further counterfeit checks, financial authorities have decided to adopt new security-enhanced designs.
We have made the letters that read cashier's check change color. Depending on which angle it's looked at, the letters will be either purple or green.
At the beginning of next month, ATM machines will no longer accept magnetic stripe cards. People will have to use what's called integrated circuit cards or IC cards to prevent people from using magnetic stripe cards that were duplicated from the original. As for cash advances, the terminology will change. Cash advance services using credit cards will now be called short-term card loans. This is to make it clear to consumers that the service is a type of a loan and not a cash withdrawal service. Now, 2014 also proves to be a better year for those that own domestic automobiles. Auto insurance for domestic cars will be slashed by an average of 2.9%, while those that own imported cars will pay more by an average of 11.3%. Finally, financial authorities have strengthened the penalty for accounting fraud. Presidents of companies or executive-level personnel found guilty now face up to 7 years in prison and 65,000 US dollars in fines. Yurian, Arirang News.
The year-old city of Sejong moved a step closer to becoming a regional administrative hub for Korea this morning when the government held its first meeting of the new year in the central city and away from the capital for the first time. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
The Korean government held its first meeting of the new year on Thursday in the central city of Sejong. It was the first time the meeting was held in the new administrative city. The meeting led by Prime Minister Chung Hong-won was also broadcast live at the central government complex in Seoul. The government's annual New Year's meeting has been held in Seoul for the past 40 years, but starting this year, it will take place at the government complex in Sejong. Around 600 officials that represent government entities in the new administrative hub took part in the meeting. Prime Minister Chung said the nation's administrative system is at a turning point.
Despite the difficulties we face with the government office relocation plan, we should consider this as a chance to advance the nation's administrative system.
Around 10,000 officials from 31 ministries and state agencies, including the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Ministry, are now working in Sejong following the second phase of a government office relocation plan that wrapped up last December. The new administrative center is the legacy of an election pledge by the late President Roh Moo-hyun in the early 2000s that aims to diminish the focus on the nation's capital and achieve balanced regional development. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Moving over to the National Assembly, after passing the 2014 budget bill and other key bills in the early hours of New Year's Day, Korea's rival parties are now turning their attention to local elections set for June. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Hyun-ji has the story.
The ruling Sinuri Party is determined to win a landslide victory in the June local elections, in which more than 3,900 local government seats are up for grabs. It plans to harness all party resources and energy for the elections in a bid to empower the Park Geun-hye administration. As the first regional elections under the Park administration, the June elections will serve as an interim evaluation of our presidency.
It's time for us to pull up our collars and approach the public with a humble heart and integrity. We must make 2014 a year that guarantees a bright future for the party.
The stakes are particularly high for the main opposition Democratic Party, which suffered a string of election defeats, starting with the 2012 presidential election. It plans to appeal to voters by accusing the Park administration of worsening the people's livelihoods and the nation's democracy.
In addition to protecting democracy and the people's livelihoods, we need an election victory this brand new year.
The Democratic Party recognizes the need for all-out reform and strengthened internal unity, as it has not only the ruling party to battle, but also a new party led by independent lawmaker An Chul-soo. An is pushing ahead with plans to form a third party that he says will overcome the old politics of the two-party system. His new party is fast gaining popularity in the southwestern Honam region, which has long been the Democratic Party's traditional power base.
The old system and way of thinking that wants to keep its vested rights by settling for regionalism and refusing to perform itself while talking down on the other must be eradicated starting in the Honam region.
An's new party is sure to split the opposition vote, but An has stressed that he won't merge with others, like he did in the 2012 presidential election when he unsuccessfully joined with the DP to try and get their candidate Moon Jae-in elected president. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
The Korea Railway Corporation is making headway in normalizing train services following a 22-day-long union strike that ended earlier this week. Although all union workers are back on the job, Korail-operated services were running at just 75% of normal capacity on the first official workday this year. Subways are scheduled to resume normal operations on January 6th and all train services on January 14th, while train ticket reservations for the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday will begin next Tuesday as planned. Meanwhile, Korail CEO Choi Eun-hye said today that in order to regain the people's trust, disciplinary action will be sought against those responsible for leading the strike.
Now, Korean lawmakers ratified the government's 2014 spending bill of 355.8 trillion won. That's roughly $340 billion, just narrowly avoiding a budget crisis and the risk of undercutting the economy's nascent recovery.
The spending bill represents a 2% increase from 2013 and a slight reduction from the government's initial proposal of 357.7 trillion won. Now for a closer look into Korea's budget 2014. We're joined live in the studio by Dr. Yang Jun-suk, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea.
Professor Yang, welcome to the program. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Now, so let's look at the budget 2014. What were the main principles in drawing up this 2014 government budget, and what's your overall impression of the size of the budget?
Okay, well, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance said that they had 5 main goals in mind. The first was economic recovery and increasing the potential output for Korea. Second is job creation, and then increasing stability and living standards for ordinary Koreans, and increasing public safety and increasing public's trust in government, and lastly, improving government's fiscal soundness. So government asked for 357.7 trillion won in spending and 370.7 trillion won for revenues, and they got mostly what they wanted, very close to what they wanted through the National Assembly. And note that the spending is slightly less than revenues, so this was designed to be hopefully a surplus budget because Korea has been in government budget deficit for the last couple of years.
Well, they apparently said they tweaked the budget with an emphasis on the livelihoods of the people and the economy. It looks like there are major changes to come in health, welfare, and labor sectors. So could you define some of the changes that we can expect?
Okay, well, as you said, and as with the presidential politic rhetoric that they had a couple of years ago, they wanted to bulk up the welfare policies and policies for economic recovery. So they have more job opportunity programs. They mentioned mentoring programs for new entrants into the workforce, flex time and part-time job programs, programs designed for individualized unemployed workers, also welfare programs for working parents and senior citizens, and trying to reduce the tuitions for universities. And assistance to small and medium-sized companies, especially for R&D that they do. And then there was an emphasis on collecting more taxes, so that they will close tax loopholes. They will try to go after people who don't pay taxes. So in that sense, this is a budget that's following the political rhetoric.
Now, on the other hand, there are ministries like, or agencies like National Intelligence Service, the Ministry of Patriots and Veteran Affairs, and the Cyber Warfare Command, who saw their spending cut down. Now, the nation's intelligence agency has, of course, been at the forefront of controversies in recent days. Now, what do you see in the budget changes in those ministries?
Okay, well, they cut not only the National Intelligence Service, but also some budget for Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs. They also cut some programs like the Korean fighter jet project. I think this is in line. Well, they wanted to raise the welfare spending, so they had to cut some money from somewhere. And also, it surprised me a bit that they also cut some money out of the education budget. Well, I should say this more carefully. They increased the education portion of the budget, but not as much as the government agencies asked for. So those were the education and defense were the areas that got cut during the negotiations in the National Assembly. But still, defense and education is the third and fourth largest component of the budget. So if you had to cut money from somewhere, it'll probably have to become cut from those places.
And they will see rises, although I suppose the amount of the raise is not as high as the government had anticipated.
Yes, so at least the nominal amount going to those areas will increase. And I should also say that the taxes have increased as well, at least for the richest Koreans. The top income tax rate of 38% will now be applied to people who make 150 million to 300 million won per year. So government is also looking out to get some more revenues in order to turn their budget into a surplus.
Okay, well, I'm sure some of them can afford to pay a little bit more taxes. Well, another factor that stands out is the fact that the decrease of total expenditure is larger than the total revenue. What does this mean, Dr. Yan?
Okay, as I said, the government, well, if you take the OECD standards, then Korean budget has been slightly in surplus. But if you take the actual amount that the government is responsible for, then we've been in slight deficit for the last 3 or 4 years. And I think people are concerned, especially with the examples that we see in places like Greece and the demographic problems coming up, which will mean massive increases in government spending in the next 10 to 20 years, that we do need to sort of save up now, at least in terms of government budget. So I think they're being very careful that they're trying to turn the government deficit into a surplus. So what we see in things like the state-owned company, state-owned enterprise reforms like the Korail or the housing corporations, I think that all reflects this desire to start saving before the demographic bomb hits.
Right. When we look at the revised or the approved budget bill, the budget for the administration's major policy agenda was more or less approved without many revisions. Now, what are some of the government's key goals, and what's your take on them?
Okay. Well, as I said, I think from the part of the view of the government, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, they wanted to have a surplus budget. In terms of the politicians, they wanted more welfare because they've been accused of not keeping their campaign promises. But also another interesting aspect of this budget is that a lot of money is going to regional governments or regional projects. For example, the value-added tax, traditionally 5% of the value-added tax has gone to regional governments to supplement their budget, but that percentage has risen to 11%. And also, if you look at various programs within the budget, then the regional programs for the regional economies have risen a lot. I think that reflects the need for the politicians to start campaigning for the regional elections in June.
Okay, here's a very difficult question for you. Your overall assessment of Budget 2014, thumbs up?
I think it's reasonable. It represents a slight rise in spending from last year, but not too big. And I think the emphasis on welfare is desirable at the current stage of Korean development. I think we're probably placing a bit more attention on SOCs, social infrastructure, than we need to at this moment. But the budget, the explanation from the government for the budget includes a very interesting statement which says that we're not seeking to build new infrastructure, but make the existing infrastructure more effective and efficient. Now, if we are going to put some money into social infrastructure, then I think that's actually a pretty good goal to have.
All right, Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea, thank you so much for speaking with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Let's now go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for an update. Now, Bo-kyung, it was a nice mild winter day here in Seoul. Were other regions just as fortunate?
Well, Kwan-jin, it was a mild winter day across the nation, although a dry weather alert has been issued in Gangwon-do province and a dry weather warning in the southeastern coastal regions.
Well, the weather seems perfect, and if only it could stay this way, but can we hope and wish it will?
Well, Daniel, the answer to that question is yes. It looks like we will continue to have bearable winter weather conditions through next Wednesday. But the news isn't all rosy because an influenza spread watch has been issued. So make sure to wash your hands as frequently as possible and take extra care of your health. Other than that, fine dust is still here with us. Now, Gwangju is getting about 2 to 3 times the normal levels of fine dust, and that will stick around through later tonight. As for tomorrow's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -1 degrees with a high of 9. Meanwhile, Gwangju and Busan hit 12. Looking ahead at other regions, Daejeon reaches 8 degrees while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang peak at 10 and -2 degrees respectively. Well, that's all for now, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Bo-kyung, and that wraps up the news for this hour. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll see you right back here same time tomorrow. Good night.